Hi, I'm Leslie with Cinema Siren and ASIFA Hollywood, and welcome to Genius of Animation, problem solving and character and story. If I start listing all the awards that this panel has between them, I would spend the entire 50 minutes actually just listing awards that these panelists have. So the representation of talent is really an embarrassment of riches. I'm really honored, and you guys are so lucky to be hearing from them today because they have worked on so much, and if your life has been made better by cartoons, then their lives have made you better. That's how important they are to animation. So I'm just going to quickly introduce everyone. Floyd Norman, who's a Disney legend and a Floyderer. Jane Baer, who's has been animating since Sleeping Beauty, and she actually went to Art Center with Floyd, and so they've been pals a long time. And she ran her own production company for animation, and if you like Roger Rabbit, she has a lot to do with you liking it. Nik Ranieri is a character animator. He's known for Pocahontas and Ursula, Lumiere and Hades, and Princess and the Frog and Tangled, and just lots and lots of great movies. Kathy Zielinski, who started with Black Cauldron and Mickey's Christmas Carol, but she's worked, I think, every studio. She was on worked with Kung Fu Panda and How to Train Your Dragon and The Simpsons and Roger Rabbit and The Little Mermaid and Aladdin and just lots and lots. And she really is one of the best animators working today. So. And it's her first panel at Comic-Con ever. So, no longer a con virgin. So that's exciting. I was glad to be the person that helped bring her here. Randy Haycock, Disney character animator, who worked on Adult Simba and Pocahontas and Kida from Atlantis and Naveen from Princess and the Frog and Frozen and Moana. So, Randy. And Aliki Theofilopoulos, right? Yes. Yes? Okay. She started at Disney on films like Tarzan and worked through the entire production of Phineas and Ferb. She executive produced Descendants Wicked World, and now she's a supervising animator on a new show called Harvey Street Kids. How many have seen Harvey Street Kids? Because if you haven't, you should. You're missing it. It just came out, and she was the second person that was brought on to that project, so we'll be talking about that with her. Shadi Petosky is the head of Puny Studios, co-creator of Danger and Eggs, for which they got an Emmy. Yes. So that's exciting, and it's a great show. And she's executive producing the upcoming 12 Forever, so that's going to be coming up very soon. Yeah. And Mindy Johnson is an educator and historian, and she focuses on women and in the history of animation in what she calls her story. And with her book, Ink and Paint, The Women of Animation, which you could kill some with or read. It's very heavy, but wonderful. And then she has actually a new project called Pencils, Pens, and Brushes, The Great Girls of Disney Animation. So we'll be talking about that too. So Floyd. So we were talking yesterday, and he said he's worked on so many projects. There are so many problems that get solved in the history of, the beginning of a film to the end. But we were talking about Jungle Book and how much that changed from the beginning to the end. Can you talk a little bit about Jungle Book and how it morphed and the character that we didn't even know existed ever?
I have to start this discussion?
You do.
Lucky me. Wow. Well, okay, let's start with the Jungle Book that Bill Peet had worked on probably for over a year. Gorgeous work, fantastic work. Only one problem, Walt Disney hated it. And so he wanted to start over. And so the first question we asked, well, what can we keep? And he said, I don't like any of it, start over. And so, but that is not unusual in this wonderful world of animated filmmaking. Most projects we start, the film we end with is not always the film we started with, because it's a journey. It's a journey that takes years, and as we move through the story development process, the film tends to change. Characters come and go, the narrative changes, we learn things along the way. And I think overall that's what makes this job of animated filmmaking so interesting, is because it's full of surprises. No matter how many times you do this job, and I've been doing it over 50 years, no movie is ever a cakewalk. Even though I've worked on dozens of films, when you start a new movie, you're starting at square one. And people think that with all the years of experience you have, that's going to solve all your problems. Well, no, it doesn't, because the problems are never the same. Just because you solved the problem on your last movie doesn't mean that solution is going to work on your present movie. So for me, it's continually learning and growing and developing as a writer, artist, filmmaker. You learn on every film. And so my first movie as a story artist was The Jungle Book back in 1966. And my last film was Monsters Incorporated with Pete Docter up at Pixar. And we wrapped it up around, around the year 2000, I think. But that journey was full of pitfalls and surprises, and I never knew what was coming at me next. So the advice I give my students when I talk about storytelling is learn to do your job, and just because you've done something before doesn't mean that's going to save you the next time around, because it's never the same. A story always changes, characters change. It is a job that never gets old for me, because I simply don't know it all. I'm an old timer, and I still consider myself a student.
So who's the character, the rhinoceros, that I didn't know about this? Which I thought was so cool.
I'll bet you guys know this. Rocky the Rhino was a character we had in the Jungle Book.
Anyone?
You guys remember Rocky? Character created by Ken Anderson, I believe. Well, maybe Bill Peet did it initially, but Ken did a lot of the character, design. And then Milt Kahl, as Milt was, Milt would do, he redrew it and made it better, made it work for animation. And then after doing all this, then Walt Disney absolutely hated it, because the character was just so obnoxious. Our voice actor was Frankie Fontaine, who was a comedian on the Jack Benny program, the Jackie Gleason show, and he was kind of this moronic idiot who, I'm going to do his voice for you now. He's like, yeah, and so our story guys thought that was funny, and Walt Disney thought it just totally sucked, and he hated it. And we showed him the storyboards. He hated the storyboards, but the story guys wouldn't give up. They put it up on reels. They thought, well, if we show it to Walt on reels, that'll change his mind. We put it on reels, and Walt still hated it. So Rocky got cut out of the Jungle Book, and probably it was a good thing.
And what was the thing with the drag? Somebody wanted everybody in drag on the.
Oh, Larry Clemens, one of our story guys. Larry Clemens was an old, we call them the old guys. It's really funny. I look back on these guys. I was a young kid when I was working on the Jungle Book, and I considered all these old Disney veterans the old guys, because they'd been around forever. Guys like Ken Anderson and Ralph Wright, and Vance Gary was younger. But Larry had written for Bing Crosby, I think probably back in the 40s. And Larry's idea of making something funny was to put the character in drag. And so that's why in that number with Baloo the Bear is wearing that grass skirt and that coconut bra. That's Larry thought, man, it's hilarious. You put a character in drag, it's a guaranteed laugh. But
Interesting.
There you go.
Thank you. Okay, Jane. So you had this really great story about when you were working on Roger Rabbit, and how, can you talk a little bit about working on Roger Rabbit and how that wound up happening, and then some of the problems that needed to be solved around that?
Well, first of all, most of Roger Rabbit was done in London with Richard Williams, and he's notorious for not meeting his deadlines. So there was 2 sequences, Toontown and Benny the Cab, that they pulled from London, and we set up the animation, second unit animation, in a warehouse in Glendale with 1 window, no address. We were sort of
The Secret
invisible.
Service.
We were really invisible. And so we did...
1400 Airway.
You knew the address? Yeah. Well, it wasn't posted above our building, but anyway, so we were brought in to head up and create the Toontown sequence and Benny the Cab. Those were our 2 sequences. And it was a challenge because we were really under a tight deadline, and it was just, but it was so much fun. And so we had a good crew. We whittled our crew down to a very tight crew and got rolling on the animation, and then we got to a scene where Benny the Cab is beetling down this little narrow alley, and Bob Hoskins is driving, of course, and they look up and the weasels are coming straight for them in their car, so it's going to be a head-on crash. So we animated this contraption like an accordion that brought Benny way up in the air, and so the weasels went underneath them and avoided a head-on collision. So it was easy to animate Benny way up in the air, but we couldn't get Hoskins. We didn't know. And Hoskins did most of his own stunts throughout the whole film, but this was over the top. So every idea we came up with was vetoed, and finally we thought, well, we just have to animate him. So Hoskins in this one scene is animated, the only animated Hoskins in the whole picture. And to keep it authentic, Amblin had their wardrobe department cut little pieces out of his jacket and a clipping off of his tie so we could match the texture and the colors. And so we animated them, and I'll bet you if you freeze frame that, you won't be able to tell the difference. I hope.
And you were saying Sleeping Beauty, the first thing you ever worked on. You have a few.
Yeah, it was, Floyd and I went to Art Center together, as I told you. There's no animation classes back in the olden days. And so Disney trained in-house. And I ran out of money. I was working my way through school, and I ran out of money. And so I thought, well, I better get a job. And I was really lucky. I'd always wanted to work at Disney. And right at that time, they were hiring. So I hauled in my little portfolio, and I was hired. And first thing we had to learn to draw was Donald Duck, and in between Donald Duck. So that was my intro into Sleeping Beauty.
And then you did the scene in the forest and had like the.
Oh yeah, I worked on Aurora, Briar Rose, where she's dancing in the forest with the animals in the cape and got her little basket. And so it was.
And animating the hair was.
Oh, the hair, yeah, was. Well, the animator was Mark Davis. He did a beautiful job, just a beautiful job, as he always does. So he did.
Thank you. Nik, so you worked on, you talked a little bit about Lumière and some of the changes that happened for Lumière. Interesting, we were talking outside about Hades, both have elements of fire as the character.
Yeah, well, basically, you know, if you're in the animation department, you tend to not affect story as much as, say, the story department. I only did one stint in story, and that was during Pocahontas. And basically, I was brought in to do gags because the script was very dry, and so they said we need more animal gags. So it was myself, Dave Crooksma, and Chris Buck, and we were called in to sort of drop jokes in wherever we could, but that was about it as far as affecting the story goes. But character-wise, there were design elements that we try to put in to help feed the character, to help make him more appealing on screen and affect where he goes, just based on design. In Lumiere's case, he was originally designed like a real candle, and the wax was dripping down over top of the base, and he looked very old and saggy and all that. And I said, you know, this guy's supposed to be a Maurice Chevalier type character. Why don't we, you know, give him a little bit of a facelift and tighten up some of those bags and things. So I streamlined him a bit and gave him a little bit of a overhaul and made him look a little bit more suave, and that in turn helped the direction of the character in his attitude. And as far as Hades goes, well, I think one of the biggest changes, you know, in this business, you learn more from your mistakes sometimes than you do your successes. And the biggest, one of the biggest mistakes I made, if not the biggest, was they actually gave me the choice for Hades' voice. And it was down to two people. It was down to James Woods and John Lithgow. And I was like, they said, well, it's up to you. You're going to be animating him, Nick. And I'm like, and so I made the wrong decision. I thought to myself, well, James Woods is hilarious, but could he be menacing? Because I only had one little test to go on, and but the John Lithgow test that I had, they got the test from a film that he did called Raising Cain, and he was really creepy, and I thought, oh, he's going to be so different and all that. So I thought, I'll go with John Lithgow, right? And what I didn't realize was that they had sort of liked the take that James Woods gave, and so they started to change the script based on his performance that he did in his test. And so all of a sudden, when we got John Lithgow into the studio and put the whole thing up on reels, it was John Lithgow doing James Woods, and it just didn't match. And you know, he's a brilliant actor, but it didn't work. And so I said, I went to the producer and I said, I can't, you know, this just doesn't work. Can we get James Woods? And she looked at me and she's like, you made the decision. You're gonna have to live with it. Okay, I guess so. You know, I started to work on it, and then they screened the film for Michael Eisner. And Michael Eisner looked at it, and I have to thank Michael Eisner for this. It's one of the only decisions that I can remember, you know, that directly affected me that he made. He looked at it, and after the screening, he basically said something to the effect of, you know, some villains are scary, some villains are funny, some villains are both. This guy's neither. And within a week, James Woods was the voice of it. Yeah, and you know what? You know, like I said, it didn't work out. And John Lithgow, like I said, brilliant actor, and he you know, got his day on Shrek. You know, our loss was Shrek's gain. So, you know, I'm sorry he wasn't hurting, but you know, no matter how brilliant an actor is, sometimes it just doesn't mesh. The part just doesn't work.
That was great. That's wonderful. So, Kathy, you were talking to me about, welcome to Comic-Con panel. Yay. So you're first. I'm always going to invite you. So talk a little bit about working on The Hunchback of Notre Dame, because I love all of this very political stuff around working on Frollo. And
he fits right in with the Me Too moment.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Frollo, he had a lot of problems because in the book, he's an archdeacon, and I know that Disney was worried about the Catholic Church So they thought they were going to have people picketing the film. And so they had to make him judge Claude Frollo. And, but, you know, we all wanted him to be a priest, you know. So I did try, when I could, put some kind of like pious kind of symbol as he's, you know, acting and things like that. Tried to treat him kind of like what you would imagine, what you would see images of people in paintings where they're trying to look holy and stuff like that. So I did try to put some of that in, even though he was a judge. Another big issue we had with Frollo is that there's a scene where he's sniffing Esmeralda's hair, and that scene actually used to be super long. He just sniffed and sniffed and sniffed, and it was super, super creepy. He totally missed the sexual harassment meeting at Notre Dame. And,
I don't think there are meetings about sexual harassment at Notre Dame.
So anyway, Gary and Kurt called me in. They said, you know, we have a problem because the rating board wanted to give Hunchback a PG-13 or something like that, and because of that scene, and they were like, but we really like the scene, so we're going to cut it down, and that sort of satisfied the ratings board. But I wish I had like the full take, you know, because it, you know, it would have been really nice to look at how creepy it was. But anyway, it still gets the point across. And then just like one other little funny tidbit with Frollo is that, so I designed his face and the hat. The costume was, his robe was designed by Gene Gilmore. Anyway, with the hat, I thought, wouldn't it be cool to do a triangle hat with this, you know, scarf wrapped around it? And it looked cool in a couple poses, but when you go to animate that thing, it was really terrible. And people were ready to kill me. And as we were getting toward the end of the film, people were just like pulling their hair out. And so I said, hey, to Gary and Kirk, the directors, I said, hey, there's that end sequence where he's running around. Maybe the hat can just fall off his head, and then we never have to see it again. And they're like, yeah, that works. So if you watch the film, you know, he's running around, the hat falls off, and you never see it again. And there were a lot of happy people at that point. So like, hey, no more Frollo's hat.
And what you were talking a little bit about Pocahontas, that you had a few elements in that were problem solving.
Pocahontas, and this happens where characters will be created and they may get cut. And so I actually, in Pocahontas, when I started on that, there were two foppish gentlemen that hung around Radcliffe. And so they were comedy relief, but then you got the dog who's comedy relief, and then you got Wiggins who's comedy relief, so you have too many characters. So I had animated maybe about 6 or 7 scenes when they told me, you know, we're going to restructure. They actually the whole production went back into story. I mean, we were all animating it, and then they decided we got to restructure this story because Pocahontas started off being a much more comical, lighthearted film, and I guess they wanted to make Jeffrey was there at the time. Jeffrey wanted it to be a little bit more real and serious and stuff. So, so the story structure changed, and then my characters got cut, and their business was transferred to Wiggins and the dog character. But it worked out for me because I actually went, well, I have nothing to do. There's a cool villain in Hunchback. Can I go over and check that out? So it really worked out for me. But it's just funny that happens in the business where things will get cut because of story reasons.
Thank you. Randy, I love your story about Naveen. Let's start with that one.
Okay.
How Naveen started out and why Naveen changed you guys.
So I wasn't originally supposed to animate Naveen. I was originally supposed to animate his valet there, and so, but the animator they wanted to animate Naveen, they couldn't get a contract with. They worked for a long time, and so one day I went to the directors and I said, if you can't get him, I'd be happy to do it, you know. looked like a fun character. He was really the first Disney prince with personality, I always say. Everybody kind of talks about Flynn, but Naveen was first, right? So he had great personality. He was very funny and charming, and I thought it'd be a fun character to do. Anyway, so, but when he started, he was a British prince, blonde British prince. And we were working on that for a while. And of course, Oprah Winfrey was one of our voices. She was Tiana's mother. And when she saw that we were going to have a white, blonde prince save their black princess from her life, she was like, that ain't happening. And so
Oprah strikes again.
Yeah. Now, I'm partial to blonde white people, but I totally agreed with her. And so what we did is we ended up creating a kind of multi-ethnic or some ambiguous ethnicity character so that nobody would have a problem with where he came from, and created a country that didn't exist, so nobody could say, well, that doesn't work either. So, and even created a little language for him to speak that nobody can complain about either. So we found a nice politically correct way to present our prince. But to me, the most important thing is we got a great voice actor named Bruno. I can't remember Bruno's last name. Bruno something. He was from Brazil. And he just came up with this perfect accent. His delivery was great, and he just had all the charm and humor of the character. And then for me, was it? Yeah, Bruno Campos. Yeah, Bruno Campos. And he was great. And so we had this character who was voiced by a non-white person and looked like he could come from anywhere from Kazakhstan to who knows where, right? So we were able to create a character that, in the end, nobody had any problems with, in terms of the politics of that. And I think, that's important to understand about Disney, is that we make movies for everybody in the world, and we don't want anybody to kind of have a problem with that. So we work very hard with focus groups and different things like that to make sure that our films are respectful to different cultures and respectful to all and are representative of a lot of different cultures and peoples in the world. And so I thought we did a good job with Naveen.
Yeah, that was great. Can you talk a little bit about Kita? Because I did not know that Mike Mignola was one of the concept artists, and you working with him on the character.
So we decided to bring in Mike Mignola on Atlantis because everybody liked his comic style. It was kind of a challenging style to work with in animation because it's kind of a poster art style, which is very static, a lot of hard angles and deep shadows and things like that. And it was a little bit challenging for us on a design point. And for Mike, he came in to work on an animated film, and he also felt uncomfortable with the idea that he's got to make his characters animatable. So he basically just drew Mike Mignola, which is kind of what we wanted. But when he came to meet with me about Kita, because I was the supervising animator on the character, he's like, I just don't draw pretty girls. It's why all my girls got crew cuts and trench coats. And so he's like, I'm not really sure what you're trying to do here, but I know it's Disney and you want her to be pretty. But so he gave some crude little sketches, and I think you can see some of them online. They're really nice little sketches, but they're very simple and certainly nowhere near kind of a finished design. And he basically gave me, here's some ideas I have. You go ahead and make it what you need to do with it. And so it gave me a lot of freedom as an animator to kind of design her and try to use some of the principles that Mike used in his drawing style. And I got some things from, he did in fact I saw it on the exhibit floor here in the IDW booth. He did the adaptation for Bram Stoker's Dracula. And when he was drawing Winona Ryder, he was kind of drawing a pretty girl. And so I was looking at his drawings of that. I had copied, panels from that comic and pasted them up around so that I could kind of have that as a reference to help me as well. But the biggest influence I had on Kita was in her personality, and in a lot of ways, she's kind of my most personal character. She has a very stoic, kind of serious. She took everything super seriously, and when we did the storyboards and we brought in the voice actress, Cree Summers, to record it, they recorded her very stoic and serious. And we watched the film, early work reels of the film, and I just thought, she's not very likable. She's mean to Milo. She's mean to her dad. She's arguing with this feeble old man who can barely stand and is blind. And she's like just yelling at him, it seemed like, all the time. And with Milo, she's just twisting his arm and just seems really grouchy. And I don't like her. So I pitched to the directors a different idea of the character, a character who's more playful, who recognizes that here comes Milo, who comes from a society where women don't show their ankles, and he meets a girl in a bikini. And how is he going to react to that? Well, he's going to be super off balance and uncomfortable around her. And she has no regard for personal space. She's always touching him and pushing him and pulling on him. And so I thought, can I play with that so that she's always in control of that relationship? So we changed her personality without re-recording any of the voice. We changed her personality simply by the visual performance, which is, I think, the job of an animator, is to create that visual performance. And sometimes that visual performance is a variation on the vocal performance. And certainly with Kita in a lot of those scenes, we did that. And then with her father, it was to give her a more of a pleading expression than an angry attitude. So she still was passionate about her positions when she's arguing with her father, but it's more, please, you got to believe me, you got to get behind me on this, Dad, kind of a thing. And then giving her little business like lighting his lamp and wiping his face with a damp rag and stuff, that she has this routine of caring for him. Adding little bits of business like that helped add something that wasn't in the original story, that helped you understand that her and her father have a long relationship and that she's used to caring for him. So even while she's arguing with him, she's taking care of him. She's making him comfortable and all that. And I thought it made her a more likable character.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Aliki, so you've done so much in this industry, and now you're the supervising producer, which is so exciting for this new show, which has gotten incredible reviews. Can you talk a little bit about what drew you to wanting to work on the project, because you're the second person that got called in, and what sorts of challenges you saw in a larger sense, not so much specific to character, but more that you wanted to have different sizes and different shapes and have more kids see themselves on screen.
Yes, I was really lucky to get my start with some of the people on this panel, which is really exciting to sit here with you guys. I had my start at feature animation. I moved into television, and something that I really wanted to do throughout my 20 years was have a show with comedic female leads. And it was something that had proven very difficult to do. And I was at Disney, very happy at Disney TV, running Descendants Wicked World, which was awesome. And I was brought into DreamWorks to have this meeting to take a look at some of their shows that they were looking for people to head up. And I saw some initial artwork for Harvey Street Kids that was done by Katie Rice that I just fell in love with. And I love this idea of taking this classic old comic and taking these girls from the comic and putting them together as these kind of rulers of the street. So I just fell in love right away, and I knew it was the thing that I just had to do. So as you mentioned, I was brought on very early. There was a writer in-house working with the development team, but I was brought on to to continue developing it and just shape what the show would become. And one thing that was really important to me was that I wanted all girls of different shapes and sizes and personalities and to be able to see themselves in these girls. So I didn't want just the typical pretty, perfect, skinny, I just was so tired of that. So,
And that's not who we are anyway, let's be honest.
And that was it was not only what I wanted everybody to see, we have an African American character, we have a character that's larger than life in personality and in body type. but also in their personalities. I was just really tired of the girl character being the girl one in many shows, or kind of the wet blanket, or the one that doesn't have the comedic lines and doesn't carry the story. And here was this opportunity where there would be these three distinctly different female characters that were comedic, but their own people. We have Audrey, who's a spitfire tomboy type, and then we have Dot, who's really into science and very analytical, and then we have Lotta, who's full of emotion and passion. And we don't even acknowledge Lotta's size. We don't acknowledge, like, we have a character who wears a hijab. Like, we don't talk about it in the show, but it was important to me to have these things represented visually so that kids could see themselves and identify with our characters, and we could have a show that wasn't about just this one type of girl. And in fact, we take turns with who drives our stories many times, and that they could all be friends too, that they're not in separate groups. Everybody is friends with each other, even though they are distinctly different personality types.
And also, I think there's an element of multi-dimensional characterization of girls that is so kind of central to the show. It's not sugar and spice. It's partly that, but it's kids are a lot of different
and
things.
The thing that was important to me too is I have felt that many times when we talk about empowered female characters, that means we have to hand them a sword. And it's not that I'm against empowered sword fighters that are female. That's awesome too. But I think that we can have empowered characters, strong female characters. That term is used a lot. We can have strong female characters because they're strong in their character. They're strong in who they are. Like, it was really important to me with the scripts to be able to, if we looked at a script and we crossed out our girls' names, we should be able to know who would say which line. Like, I wanted the characters to be so distinct that they would, they would say certain things, they would react a certain way, they would be so who they are, and we would see that all throughout the episodes. And that was something that, I just really wanted girls to see that in the shows. I wanted them to see the different parts of themselves. That was something that was really important to me.
And it's borne out that it's been very well received. So if you guys haven't watched it, it's also really unabashedly kid-like, the show.
It
There's
is
a real innocence and sweetness
unapologetically
to it.
kid-like and unapologetically like the thing that I sort of got myself off track, but I also have this thing that I don't want to apologize for girl characters being girly too. Like, we're all of it. Like, it's like Lotta also likes sparkles and hearts and girly stuff too, and there's nothing wrong with that. Why do we feel like we have to ignore that part too? Like, it's all awesome. So I wanted to have all of that in the show, and I'm so happy people are clapping about that. That's so cool.
Yeah, absolutely, and thank you. Shadi, I think we should take a moment and say congratulations on your Emmy, because that's so wonderful.
It's in the mail. I don't have it yet.
Oh, no.
They're mailing it to us. I have a little spot for it, but it'll come in 4
And there's
or
a
5
picture of
months.
you with it, so it must
You
have
guys don't.
happened.
Yeah, well, I have a picture with somebody else's Emmy. So they give you, when you get an Emmy, it was a group Emmy, and when they only give you one, so we all had to pass it around and hold it, and then the rest of them come, months later? You guys probably know. They mail them later, so that's what they're telling me.
So one of the things that I think is important on this panel when we're talking about problem solving and character and story is sometimes this problem solving is larger than just a specific character. Sometimes it's that there's not, as we were talking about with Aliki, we're looking for more, to be able to see more on screen than we've been able to see before. And Danger and Eggs really did do that. There were lots of ways in which it represented a more diverse collection of characters than anyone had seen before in one show. And can you talk a little bit about the decision about that, and about how you're kind of taking that same mindset and perspective into 12 Forever?
Sure. I guess with the theme of it, this was a weird one because I had pitched like a lot of you said a lot of the stuff I wanted to say. So,
Well, you can say it again, because there's never too many times to say what we're saying right now.
I'm doing a show called Harvey Street Kids. No, it was, and it wasn't going anywhere. So it's all changing now, right? So I think last fall there were all these articles saying oh, Shadi, Danger and Eggs is the queerest show, and now so much stuff has come out that people, even just in your year, are like, oh, Danger Eggs is okay, but Steven Universe, like that's, so it's like, it's a weird, there can be only one kind of thing, but it seems like there's so many creators that all this stuff, I mean, we're on Tumblr or whatever, but all this stuff has become so important, and intersectional feminism in our art has become so important. So that's like happening everywhere now. But I think we started pitching versions of Danger and Eggs like 7 years ago, and it took 5 years for it to be developed. And I was pitching all these like female-driven comedies, and it was like, no, never. You can only have, if you have a female lead, and there weren't that many then, she has to have a boy best friend. So the idea of having like 2 girls was impossible. And I would go to meetings where people would literally say, like, I'll just call out Comedy Central because they've changed, but they were like, oh, we can't do shows with girls. I mean, we have Sarah Silverman, but she's not really a girl. So like, we're in those meetings where like executives are saying that to us. So Danger and Eggs started out just to fit with the theme of the panel a little bit as an adult short that was just about Philip. It was called Philip the Safety Egg, and it was in film festivals. And it was about this anxious egg who grew up in the asshole of, sorry, I saw a child as soon as I started to say asshole. Sorry. I know it says not to say asshole.
We're so edgy out in
Now
here.
you know why Philip is so anxious. So grew up in his Godzilla-like mom's, in the chicken, actually, children. The chickens don't have buttholes. They have one hole where both poo and pee, and it's called the vent. And so it's a little different. But so grew up in the mom's Godzilla-like mom's vent, and this Godzilla mom would destroy cities like Godzilla, and so Philip would look out the butthole and only see a path of destruction, and it was all about like this egg growing up in this world of destruction created by his mom. My mom is here right now. So normally I can talk about this really freely without being anxious and sweating, but it's kind of about like a relationship with the mom and destruction and stuff. We're gonna have a hard afternoon. So that was in film festivals, and then we pitched it to like Adult Swim and stuff, but nobody was really interested in it. So we were like, well, let's just try to. Cartoon Network was interested, and so it was like, let's make it a kids show. And we wanted to have a partner for Philip, and so we ended up coming up with Dee Dee Danger. And then we had that show that I really didn't want to make, which was like the girl and her boy best friend. So it was kind of a bummer, but then Amazon optioned it, and we were like, let's just go with it and figure out what it is. And we wanted to do a lot of the stuff with Dee Dee. Like, there's this one scene where she's kind of this, like, living the legacy of her father and her family, which is this daredevil family. And she goes to the Ren Fair, and they're doing that classic scene where, she's being put in a dress, and they're, like, tightening up the corset, and she's, like, can't breathe. But then she's like, oh, this is awesome. It's like a cape for my waist. And we wanted to show this, like being femme or butch or whatever is like just a part of, everybody's experience really, but we're not really allowed to show that. So we started making that kids show. I wanted it to be really queer and really campy. Like I pitched an episode about like zombie bacon fighting drag queens and all this like.
And we want to see that. But
yeah,
okay.
super camp, like my dreams and fantasies. And then, but Amazon rightly said, like, let's make it more real, it's about this anxiety and it's about this. So I really drew from like queer and trans experience about anxiety and really wanted to kind of get that in there. So there's a lot of stuff about, it was just such a like personal thing where it's just like, I want to talk about identity in this way and like childhood identity, and we want to talk about, like a lot of friendships are really superficial, so we wanted to give our friendship a lot of tension and have them like work through it and have them work through their anxiety and have them be so different but like not judgmental of each other and holding space for each other. So that was really important, and I think we did this. Have I talked for too long?
No, you're
okay.
fine.
I'm talking fast, so it seems really long. So we put that in, and we also, it was a city, and what happens in a lot of cartoons is like, cartoons are pretty inherently nostalgic, right? Like, we talk about like the 10 old men at Disney, and we talk about our favorite cartoons, and like people that grow up in animation, like it's a very nostalgic thing, and nostalgia's cool. Like everybody's here is wearing nostalgic stuff. But we were like, what is a kid today really going to relate to? Like that suburban life isn't the life anymore, right? Like kids are growing up in condos, and this was happening in a city park. So we really wanted to have more of a representation of like what the future would be. So we started to do what we called like speculative social fiction. So it's like what all these kids that are growing up in condos, like in San Diego, where it's all these. Please wrap up. All these condos, like it's going to be more diverse and it's going to have that stuff. So we wanted, to do that stuff, and we started, the only way to do that is to hire diversely, cast diversely, and sort of, do all of that, and that's what we did.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's great. That's great. So Mindy has written a book. If you don't have it, I'm really serious. If you're a fan of animation, it's all about the unsung heroines of animation, and it took a huge amount of research, and there are so many women. She could have her own panel talking a whole hour about it. I was like, well, at least we need to pimp your books. So the Ink and Paint book, it's called Ink and Paint, The Woman of Animation. Talk a little bit about the Chernobog thing.
Sure. Well, if you recall from Fantasia, which that actually really truly is a woman's film, surprisingly, many of the women, Sylvia Holland, Ethel Colsar, Faith Ruckus, were behind the story and concept elements of most of that feature animated film. Chernobog, if you recall from the Night on Bald Mountain sequence, it was actually Bela Lugosi, and I found the only known photograph of him doing live action reference for that. Bela Lugosi was a classic horror film actor. Many of you may know him as Dracula. So we found the actual photo under someone's bed, believe it or not. And so it was proof positive that had been a myth, but to provide live action, but it was a woman who came in to do, to add more dimension and depth and drama to the character. Bill Teitla's drawings were brilliant, but the character was still two-dimensional, and it was a technique called color animation, legitimate term, I'm not making it up, utilized in the 1930s when hand-rendered animation was the height. And it was the women of the paint lab developed a spray adhesive a clear adhesive to adhere to the cell. And women animators working with chalk pastel. Now, how many of you have worked with that medium? It gets everywhere, right? But where you want it. So the women of the paint lab developed an adhesive so the chalk pastel could adhere to the celluloid. And Mildred Rossi, who many of you may or may not know, she's a brilliant artist, started in the paint lab at Disney Studios and moved into animating, but working with color and chalk pastel. So when you watch Chernobog next, look for the lightning flashes, and you'll see the blues and some yellows and whites at times when the chimes are chiming. You'll see that color and depth and dimension animate in and then back out. The women of the paint lab also developed a spray adherent so that that chalk pastel would stay placed on the celluloid as it would get through checking in camera. But it was really Mildred Rossi's great color animation that gave that character this frightening dimension. A couple of quick things. Mildred then later went on to design, she was over at Universal, and designed many of the great monsters and creatures there, including a little character who happened to live in a black lagoon, which went on to, was homage certainly in The Shape of Water. So that character design originated with a woman. Her name was Mildred Rossi.
So you also have a book that is in the works, and it's illustrated by Lorelei Beauvais, who's a Disney concept artist. Yeah. It's called Pencils, Pens, and Brushes, The Great Girls of Disney Animation.
Yeah, it'll start.
And when is that going to be
It'll
available?
be out next summer in time for D23, but it features 20 women, a little more in depth than where their stories are told here. And let me tell you, the lives these women lived, not only in their animation and the work they did it at Disney Animation, but beyond. We have world record holding altitude pilots, and Mildred Rossi is being featured in there for her work beyond, for her design work in character. You know,
And it's really more geared toward kids.
7 to 10, but at the same time, it's a treasure. Visually, it's going to be stunning. I've seen my first preliminary pass on it, and Lorelai's
It
work,
looks
and the
beautiful.
content is stunning. So we'll be doing, Jane and I will be down signing this afternoon at Disney Publishing.
Right, so if you're wanting to get that book and get
12:30
it
to
signed by
1:30.
June. Everybody thank our panelists who really are so wonderful in their wisdom. It's so appreciated. Thank you guys so much for caring about who created those characters and stories that you all love so much. Have a great con.